this session is about politics, actually, which maybe is a bit of a taboo subject almost. I don't know at the moment. It seems there's mass disillusionment in relation to the political sphere, the political process that we have, that was hard won, but is possibly not serving us as it could. We're going to discuss that in various ways, have some quite interesting, quite progressive, perhaps quite radical ideas about the political process and how we might affect political change. I mean, politics really is relationships between people, and I think on that level it's something very much part of our everyday existence. You know, and maybe with that kind of insight we can think about politics as, you know, every communication that we have between. I mean, a relationship requires two things, right? It's a relationship between two things, but it's one relationship. I think it's quite fundamental to our whole idea of who we are. Are we separate? Are we one? You know, and I think it's not something we should or we can really shy away from or turn our back on. And maybe we just need to find ways to reconnect with that space and feel empowered in our political actions. So this is that. I mean, that's just a basic introduction. What we're going to do with this session potentially is have three speakers each give their story, tell their story, and maybe create a bit of a narrative and inspire and stimulate some discussion. And then we can either have a kind of group discussion or we can work in a kind of open space format and allow breakaway groups to emerge. Maybe can go a bit deeper and maybe that's a nicer way to facilitate discussion within this kind of group, which can then feed back into a kind of circular discussion at the end. And again, just reinforcing that the power of listening. And maybe that's quite important generally when we talk about politics. That the other campaign is a reference to a campaign that has been happening in Mexico, the Zapatistas, and a guy called Subcomandante Marcos, and he ran another campaign, which is basically not to speak or run for office, but to listen to the simple and humble people who struggle. That was their idea. And this is maybe in the global south, so a little bit less relevant on some levels, that specifics of that narrative. But I think it's an interesting starting point to value listening in that kind of way. So first of all, let's listen to what these guys have to say. We're going to start with Michael Thomas, and he's going to talk about the Real Utopias project.
Yeah.
Michael has set up a project called Permanent Culture Now, and it's kind of like permaculture but infused with politics. You know, it's quite active in that. Like there's an urgency almost. But he also has a lot of insight in terms of radical history. It's something you're very much interested in, aren't you?
Yeah. And I work for Transition Network.
Okay. So, Michael Thomas.
So yeah, what I want to talk about is recently we were at Transition Network looking at. Can people hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, and it's going to be on our website, Permanent Culture Now. So basically, yeah, we were looking at theories of social change and how social change happens, and I came across this guy called Eric Olin Wright, who's an American Marxist, they actually set up this project called Real Utopias, and they've wrote these series of books where they go around the world looking at different projects which are happening, which have a utopian aspect to them, but are actually affecting real change. So he talks of, like in Porto Alegre, they had a participatory budget, for example, where people in that community got together and decided how the money was spent in that area. Another one they quote is sort of like the Wikipedia as being this open source sort of thing which everyone sort of has access to, and even talking about things like public libraries as being a part of a different way that you can operate within the world. And why I really liked it and why I'm going to talk about it is because it talks about different ways of actually realising a utopian vision. So rather than like it being this thing of wouldn't it be great if we were all equal? You know, which is a real utopian thing. They actually go, right, how do we actually get to there or more towards it? So they're really interested in what happens on the ground, you know, not theoretical ideas per se, but actually how does society change? And how he describes real utopias himself as, real utopias are utopias that embody emancipatory ideals, so they're driven by an idea of a better world. And they are real because they attempt to formulate in the real world changes to institutions. So, you know, it's an enactment of an ideal in the real world. When I talk about anything theoretical, I always start with two quotes. One is by a guy called Richard Rorty, who says, theory is a terrible master, but a good servant. And I always say, like, theory, don't let theory get in the way, or ideology get in the way of what you're doing on a pragmatic level, which happens a lot. If anyone's been involved in the left, they will know exactly what I mean. And the other one is by a guy, Gregory Bateson, who says the map is not the territory, which is effectively saying, you know, you can have these ways, these frames of looking at the world, but actually, in reality, it's always different and a mess, really. You know, but they are useful, but they're not the be-all and end-all, you know. So just about, you know, when I'm talking about these things, I'm not saying that this is, and as the guy Eric Olin Wright says, you know, this is a very generalised sort of way of looking at things. So he's coming from the starting point of that we should have an economy organised in such a way to serve the needs and aspirations of ordinary people, not elites. And to do this, the economy must in some way or another be controlled by ordinary people. That is, subordinated to social power, to local communities, to civil society, effectively. And this is based on a radical democratic egalitarian understanding of social and political justice based on three moral foundations. The first one being equality. In a socially just society, all persons would have broadly equal access to the material and social means necessary to live a flourishing life. You would have a fully democratic society in which all people would have broadly equal access to the necessary means to participate meaningfully in decisions about things which affect their lives. And he also focuses on sustainability, in that future generations should have access to the social and material means to live flourishing lives at least at the same level as the present generation. So he's coming from this, that's his starting point of where we want to get to then. And obviously he's not very, doesn't think capitalism is very good at achieving these three aims. Basically because if we take each one, he says that you know, capitalism is very problematic because it inherently generates levels of inequality in income and wealth that systematically violates social justice. It generates severe deficits in realising democratic values by excluding any crucial decisions from actual deliberation by the public and allowing private wealth to affect access to political power and allowing workplace dictatorships. And it's also threatens the quality of the environment for future generations because of the imperatives of consumerism and endless growth. So yeah, he's basically coming from the Marxist standpoint of, you know, capitalism is a bad model and a bad way of organising society, and we can have a debate about that if there's people later on people think that's not the case. And he talks about there being two ways that you can transform the world to get to the you know, this better, more democratic, more equal, more sustainable world. And the first one is a lot of political parties aim for, which is what he calls ameliorative reforms. And that is where you look at existing ways that things are done, and you identify flaws in that and propose slightly different ways of doing it. You know, so, you know, there's lots of examples of that. Like most political parties who continue a neoliberal model, but say, well, it'd be all right if we just did this. or it'd be all right if we just changed it a little bit or tweak it a little bit. In contrast that, he says that there's their view of real utopias are where you envision the contours of an alternative social world that embodies the emancipatory ideals, and then looks for social innovations that we can create in the world that move us towards that destination. So it's about how do you practically move to having a society which is based on equality, democracy and sustainability. And what he talks about is there is three, in society you have the economy, which is the way that resources and stuff is distributed, and which affects the way that society operates. And I'll show you there. I have a bigger diagram. You've got diagrams. Got to love a good diagram. I don't know if people can see this very well, but so basically you have the economy in the middle, and you have economic power, civil society, and state power, all which impact on how the economy is organised and run. So at the moment, I would argue that what we have is economic power dictating how the economy works, but also controlling state power, which dictates how the economy works. Civil society is excluded from that model at the moment. What a lot of people call a corptocracy. You know, we have big business basically massively influencing political decisions. So there is civil society is marginalised in that process at the moment. And he talks about within these models there are different ways in which the economy can change to reflect the more equal, democratic, sustainable society. So you could have, for example, civil society just on its own dictating how the economy runs. Or you could have civil society influencing economic power, as well as, so economic power and civil society also dictate how the economies run. And he talks about hybrids, so there's different ways, you can have all these things interacting and impacting on the economy. So, if you think about communism in Russia, it was state power effectively running the economy there. So these are the different models that you can have. And it's how effectively we would be civil society. That's the model, where he would base most of the power would be in a more democratic, egalitarian society. Now, how do you actually how does civil society gain more power to affect the economy? And he talks about there's lots of different ways that could happen. And he talks particularly about three ways that social change actually happens, where civil society gains more power over society, and we get a more democratic or more egalitarian things developing. The first one he talks about is ruptural, which is where you have almost a revolution and a break with existing institutions, and new institutions then replace those. So you could look at the Russian Revolution initially as being a ruptural break. You can look at where things are just replaced wholeheartedly by a different model, a different way of doing things. And very often this comes under the revolutionary socialist and communist political tradition. It's based on classes acting together, the working class coming together to gain more power. Its logic with respect to the state is that it's attacking the state, and it's about confronting the ruling class, the bourgeoisie. And metaphors for success are it's basically usually based around a war, the idea of a war, a class war. He doesn't believe in ruptural breaks being that effective, because very often you have that revolution, but afterwards there's nothing in place to replace it. So you can have this real break with stuff, but it doesn't lead to, often it leads to, totalitarian democracies and these sorts of things. So he says that, you know, even though it's important to bear in mind, it's not. He doesn't see it as a really effective way of getting to a real, what he calls a real utopia. So the second model that he talks about is what he calls interstitial metamorphosis. They love this language, which effectively means just creating the new world in the shell of the old. So you could look at off-grid, people living off-grid as doing something differently, interacting in a different way, collaborative economies, the gift economy, all these sorts of things are different ways which you can develop a new form of doing things, but it sort of coexists, and you're building alternatives outside of the state model. and what he argues is that is the respect to the state with this model is you just ignore it. So you're doing your thing over there, they're doing their thing here, and that's how it happens. And the metaphor for success of that is that it's like ecological competition. So the more people that buy into, creating an alternative world, effectively over time that gains more power, and the old model begins to, struggle more and becomes reduced. The third one, which is quite an interesting one, is symbiotic metamorphosis, and that is effectively where it's like the social democratic state. So it's things like it benefits both sides. So you could look at after the Second World War, we had the establishment of the welfare state, the NHS, all these sorts of things. Capitalism was in real crisis after the Second World War. So there was an almost people coming together to do things which gave healthy workers, gave capitalism the ability to grow again, but also there was loads of gains in relation to people having a better situation, free healthcare, full employment, these sorts of things. So it's like a win-win sort of thing for these different for both sides. And what he says is like people tend to situate themselves in these different models. So you'll have people who are very much, let's smash the state, we want to get rid of the state, they're the problem, confrontation, ruptural. And then you have other people who want to create the alternative life, and then you've got other people who are involved in maybe political parties looking at reform, these sorts of things. And he also says that people spend a lot of time criticising the other ones, and there's a lot of effort going into like, oh, look at them over there, they're not doing it right, they should be doing it like us, or they're not radical enough, or these sorts of things. Where he's actually believes that throughout history you need all of these help a bit, and sometimes there may be a situation where a rupture will break with an institution, for example. You could argue if the economic crisis hadn't led to the model it has now, which is austerity, but had gone to a different, more collaborative model, say based on the commons, an idea of the commons and common ownership, that would have been a good ruptural break, if you see what I mean. So he talks about this is a very messy way that things happen. It's not simple or linear or anything. But what he's saying is that rather than every time you inch, if something moves you closer towards the emancipatory ideal of more democracy, more sustainability, and more equality, then that's good. So all these things may give little steps forward. And so that's why with their Real Utopias projects, they've gone round looking at lots of different models of things which are happening on the basis that, look, this is good, you could replicate this here, make it more widespread. I mean, stuff like Sunrise Off-Grid, like Transition, like the Commons movement, all these sorts of things. I don't know if anyone's heard of Paul Hawken. He wrote a book called The Blessed Unrest, which was just about how one of the biggest social movements that we've ever seen is happening, but because it's just lots and lots of little groups doing it, we don't see it as this big movement. But there are all these things going on all the time, which are slowly making things better, hopefully, sometimes. So there's like all these different dynamics happening. So when you're thinking about social change and getting to a better way of being, rather than having like these grandiose utopian visions, he's sort of arguing, well, what is, you know, when you look at stuff, you can frame it in these ways. Is this doing this? Is it moving towards that, or are we going back? I mean, you can argue austerity is a big step backwards in terms of like what the political class is doing in this country, but you could also see like a lot of the stuff which is going on in places like this, and the conversations which people are beginning to have around different things, the cooperative movement, the growth in all these stuff you never hear about in the news because it's good news. So there's lots of things happening all the time, and it's always changing. And so it is a good frame. And he does talk about, there are a few issues with it in terms of why. I'll just find the 2 secs. He talks of, because it is useful to name them. Sorry, that's what people. Oh yeah. So he talks about, you know, the problems of social power and civil society gaining more power over the economy, over the political system. And he says there's 2 big problems. Firstly, civil society is not a consistent, coherent whole. It's a whole multitude of loads of different organisations. You know, some who are not very nice. You know, like EDL, BNP. You know, they could be seen as civil society groups. You know, they are part of society. They're outside of the state. They're not economic. And a lot of them are based on self-interest and exclusion and the preservation of privilege. And so why would these groups lead to come together to make a better world when they're serving their own self-interests? And secondly, lots of civil society groups contain many associations that are inconsistent with having an egalitarian, emancipatory model. Because they're not democratic, you know, they're based on hierarchy, you know, they sort of replicate really what the structure is. So there are problems with it. But when you think about things like, if you thought about like the World Social Forum, and people have heard of the World Social Forum, which was something which came out of Seattle protests and all the last decade's struggle, that was the beginning of civil society groups trying to come together to do something bigger. And I just think this Real Utopias is a really good way of just thinking about, okay, well, we're doing this, how does it interact with that? And where am I situated in it? Am I part of the building the world in the, you know, the shell of the old? Am I part of this democratic model? Am I part of the political process, sorry? Or am I wanting to smash the state? And that sort of thing. And but to also bear in mind that these things aren't mutually exclusive, and actually a combination of tactics and techniques can build a real powerful thing. And like, okay, I might not want to go and, you know, burn down the council offices, you know, but if we did have a massive break, with a revolutionary break, you could say then you have the revolution, and then if you've got this whole model of developing a collaborative economy and commons-based thinking and stuff, it would be much easier to go into that next phase of something positive happening, because you've got an infrastructure there to support what comes next. There's always this thing of like, you know, bring forward the revolution happens, and then what happens the day after the revolution, or the day after that big change? Oh, right. Yeah, we still need to go to Tesco's to get our bread, and like, oh, the gas doesn't work, or you know. So there are. It's about. I mean, I think that's where Real Utopias rather than utopian is interesting, because being really utopian is like, yes, we just need to do this, and actually, what to get to a better world, you need a lot of hard graft and effort and thinking and working through stuff and all these sorts of things, which I'm sure the other 2 people will probably talk about. Thank you. Just one thing, if anyone, if Eric Olin Wright does have a website and you can download his book for free, if you're more interested in this sort of stuff, just search Real Utopias, and you can also see the series of books they've written, and they're really interesting, like what they've done. It's a really good, it's really worthwhile project, and he's done some great talks which probably explain it way better than I have on YouTube, and I really recommend having a look. If you're interested in social change, it's really interesting to just hear what he's got to say. Okay. I'm going to pass over now to David.
Can we go for it?
Not especially. Thanks, Mike. David's going to talk now. I'm sure you can introduce yourself. David's a politician.
Well, I wouldn't say politician's a dirty word, so I'm a bit reluctant to accept the label. But it is true that I have stood for elected office, even if I haven't actually been elected to any office. I wouldn't tell you a little bit about myself, but actually before that I wanted to simply say that these are 3 20-minute talks to kick off this session, isn't it? It's a 3-hour session, and I'm aware that to hold attention for 3 20-minute talks as a whole hour is quite a lot. So that if anybody wants to sort of do a little stretch, well, let's just do it now. You can just have a little stretch, touch your toes, you know. You don't have to. It's just if you feel like having a little stretch, wiggle your ass, you know, do a little bit of that. Okay, great. And I'll tell you a little bit about me. Yeah, my name is David Taylor. I have got a horribly long history of political activism, which started when I was about 16, and I had what I would describe as a wilderness experience. And it drew me into realizing that working to work to safeguard life on Earth was the single most important thing I could do with my life. And I actually committed my life to that at the age of 16, and I've actually been doing that ever since. And it included getting involved in setting up the Green Party in the very early days, right back in the 70s. It included a lot of history at Molesworth, at Greenham Common. Tony, who's here today, reminded me that he and I were the last 2 men at Greenham before all the men got kicked out and it became women only. And all kinds of direct action movements and involvement with CND and the campaign against GM, road building, loads of other stuff. So a long history behind me, and also in community action, setting up green businesses, and a range of things. So I've had a whole history behind me.
You've done all 3, haven't you?
You what?
You've done all 3.
All 3?
Yeah.
I've done lots more than 3.
Yeah.
Loads. And anyway, you're welcome at any point to ask me anything about the history of the Green Gathering, which I set up, or CND or the Green Party. I can talk about all of that. But actually what obsesses me right now is effectiveness. Because when you look back over the last 40 years, it's about 40 years since Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, McCunthler, Greenpeace, and the Green Party, they're all set up just over 40 years ago. So we've got to hit this point, and I was invited to run a panel at a Green Party conference last year to mark the 40th anniversary. And the interesting thing that, as well as celebrating it, there was a lot of serious analysis of how well we've actually done as a movement. And I think it's important to think of ourselves not in terms of the organizations we belong to, but in terms of our consciousness, our movements. You know, how many people in this country would you say broadly had a green consciousness? You know, who are broadly green in our outlook? We're talking millions of people. You know, we're actually seriously talking millions of people who broadly share that new sort of earth-conscious way of looking at the world. But how successful have we been over 40 years? Well, you just have to look at what's happening in terms of the threat of mass extinction. Scientists are now agreed we're in the middle of a mass extinction crisis. We're losing how many species per day around the planet? It's some very, very shocking figures. We're seeing ecosystem collapse in many parts of the globe. And if we look at the threat of climate change, what was it? There was a special organization set up called 350.org, and that was because if we could keep carbon intensity in the atmosphere to 350 parts per million, we would have a chance of stabilizing the climate at 2 degree increase in temperature. Okay, we've now passed 400 parts per million. And now the latest thing I'm hearing is reports of oh well, we're going to be lucky to keep it below 450 parts per million if we take radical action now. So it's a desperately serious situation. And I'm just going to assume, in fact, stick your hand up, would you, if you're seriously a climate change skeptic. If you deny the science from the IPCC, have we got any? We have got one. Fantastic. Good. Great. Well, there often are. You know, it is true. You know, it is. But I'm basing what I'm talking about basically on the accepted science, on what the IPCC have said. In other words, that we've got our carbon budget for this century. A large chunk of it has already been used up, and we have to radically cut our use of carbon and other associated greenhouse gases. And that if we don't, there's a whole series of yes.
I don't doubt the science, but I do doubt it when they spend the whole time talking about cutting emissions instead of putting carbon back in the soil, which is what they never talk about. But that's you know,
well, you
can doubt.
They're not doing
what
any of it. Whatever they're talking about,
Actually,
whatever the solutions are, they're not going with any
of them. You know what?
them.
I mean, I did see something which said that a monocultural grassland, and they looked at how much carbon is held in a monocultural grassland compared with one with many species of grass. And something like between 8 and 10 more carbon dioxide is held in a biodiverse grassland. Well, which I think just reinforces your point. That if we changed our agriculture, we could be storing, and it's not just about planting trees, it's a much more complex issue than that. We could be storing a lot more carbon in the soil. So I would reinforce that and agree with that completely.
That you can be sceptical about some things without being sceptical about others. And it tends to, everybody is always lumped together. If you're sceptical about any part of the kind of climate change sort of message,
yeah.
You're sceptical about it.
Good.
Yeah,
well,
they aren't mutually exclusive.
No.
I think what I want to do is I've just got really 3 simple points that I'd like to make. In between, you're welcome to jump in, interrupt, heckle, abuse me if you like. But if I think it's going too far, then Marcus, no doubt, will step in as our facilitator and say, you know, give the man a break. But the first point I want to make is that we are in a very, very dangerous situation. With the collapse of ecosystems, with the threat of runaway climate change. And runaway climate change is simply when we get to a point on the planet where what we've already done as humans is resulting in the planet itself causing the heating up. In other words, when the permafrost, for example, this is one tipping point, when the permafrost starts to melt, it releases a very strong greenhouse gas, methane, and that is going to speed up the whole process of the warming. As the seas warm, they're going to release CO2, and that also is going to speed up the process. As the ice caps melt, they're not able to reflect back heat back into the atmosphere. And as that's just a few, there's many more of these mechanisms that kick in, which means that as the planet speeds up, as the planet warms, that whole process of warming just gets faster and faster and faster. And you're into a scenario that's been labelled runaway climate change, at which point it's outside our control anyway, as human beings. There's very little that we can do about it. Now, of course, scientists debate about how long it will be before we get into that period. You know, some people say it's already too late. Some people say we've got 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years or more. You know, there is a valid debate going on around the detail of how long we've got, basically. It's all down to different models and the information you put in, and modelling is not an exact science. So that simply is the very first point I'd make. But my interest is in political action. So the second thing I would say is that the way we've been doing politics for the last 40 years has not worked. Right? Since those movements were set up 40 years ago, how have Greens, broadly defined, pursued their objectives? Okay, some of us have all gone joined campaign groups. We've signed up to Friends of the Earth and Greenpeace and WWF and many of the aid and development groups and social justice groups. We've gone out and done some fantastic work. And there's been lots of single issue successes, but we have not changed the way this country is going. We have not changed the economic system. And although, despite those single issue successes, the situation with the planet is getting worse and worse. So you've got a very dangerous situation. You've also got people who decided, okay, I'm going to engage in politics. Green-minded people. A lot of them went up and set up a party and joined the Green Party. And they're very active in that. But lots of Greens didn't. Some said, oh no, that's a minor party, we better join a major party, we've got a chance to influence the mainstream party. So they joined one of the mainstream parties. Labour, Lib Dems, Tories. They kind of, there's even Green Tories. I mean, people spread out and join different parties. And then, of course, there's probably half of the entire movement that actually thinks, well, all party politics itself is a load of nonsense and rubbish, and the more you vote for them, the more you encourage them. So let's just pursue direct action, community action, our own little projects back in our communities. So do you see what I'm saying? Is that green-minded people are pursuing different strategies. And there is no overarching strategy that can pull us all together, that can coordinate what we're doing and make what we're doing more effective. And it is interesting that when you talk to people who are in positions of responsibility within the Green movement, you find that there is really very little discussion about what I would call the big picture, the strategy, how we as a whole movement are doing and whether we're being effective or not. People focus on their own particular area. Right? I heard about a guy who's running a campaign on cycling in London. You know about 6 cyclists a year roughly are dying. 6 cyclists last year died in London from traffic accidents. Okay, he took that as a campaign. He's organised die-ins outside traffic for London. He's inside the door. They're having conversations. They're hoping to improve funding for cycleways and so forth in London. Fantastic, highly successful campaign. It's linked to climate change. It's great, but it's specific to one area. And I would always argue, where does that fit in with the big picture, and do we have a bigger strategy that can be part of? So that's the second point. First point is we've got a desperate situation, which really means that all of us, no matter what our single issues are, should prioritise the threat of climate change and biodiversity collapse. Right? There should be absolutely no question about that. That has got to be the number one thing in the back of all our minds. The second thing is that the way we've been doing change in politics for the last 40 years has not delivered. We've got a situation where the House of Commons simply doesn't represent adequately, anything like adequately, green opinion in this country. And I think that is generally accepted. And then the third point I would make is, what the hell can we do about it? Right, what can we do? And how can we create a campaign, a strategy that's got leverage, that is effective, that is going to change things in the real world in the very limited time that we've got available? That doesn't allow time to overthrow capitalism. All right. It doesn't allow time to completely change the ownership of all the media in the world. It doesn't allow us time to do a whole lot of the things that we care very passionately about. It means that we're going to have to be disciplined in where and how we focus our energies. We are in a fight for survival. And I always think at this point it's good to look at the boiling frog analogy. Some of you will be aware of that. What happens if you have a pan of boiling water, you drop a frog in? I mean, it's not a very nice image, is it? But,
Probably quite apt.
but the frog will jump out, actually. The frog has got a very strong survival instinct and will jump out of the pan of boiling water. What happens if you have a pan of cold water, you put a frog in, and then you warm it up slowly? Then actually the frog dies. The frog gets cooked, and ultimately dies. And I think we are facing a similar situation because our fight or flight instinct, our urge to survive, that pumping of adrenaline that we all have, does not kick in because the speed of the warming is too slow. The threat is not imminent enough. You know, if Marcus was a tiger and he suddenly jumped on you, then you'd fucking fight, wouldn't you? You'd try and get rid of him. But if our planet is being warmed gradually, although I have to say in geological terms it is very rapid, but in our human terms it's gradual, we don't have that fight or flight mechanism. So that fight for survival has to come from here, has to come from our rational brain, which is only a small part of us, and then we have to say, okay, we really have to be serious, and we have to start creating strategies for change. Okay, the third thing I want to talk about is very simply, what are some of those strategies? What are some of the threads? And I think one of the things has to be that it has to embrace everybody who is concerned about this, who broadly accepts the science. Okay, there are a lot of divisions between, for example, green-minded people in different political parties. Okay, forget that. You know, that is a division we don't need. There are divisions between those people who get involved in party politics and those who don't. Forget that division. That's dividing people who think like each other. We have to find ways of crossing those barriers. There are all kinds of people who will give many other reasons why you can't do things. What we absolutely have to do as a discipline is focus on what is possible. And that means a positive outlook. And I really believe fundamentally that if you come up with a strategy for change where people can see there is a chance to avert runaway climate change, that will in itself give people hope, ambition, and will result in many, many more people engaging in the process of change. And it can't be any one single tactic. It has to be multi-layered so that people can engage on different levels. Certainly we need parliamentary action. We need to put direct pressure on people who are being elected to different bodies at all levels of government. That's European, national, regional, local. Right? People are being elected who don't represent us. There's something badly wrong there. Now, there are things that can be done to change that if people mobilize in sufficient numbers. I'll give you an example. Back in the late 1990s, there was a coalition established that was called the Real World Coalition. Anybody here remember that? Okay, you don't. What it was a 3-year negotiation between big NGOs. So you had WWF, Oxfam, Christian Aid, CAFOD, New Economic Foundation, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace. I could go on. There was 46 of them, all together numbering probably well over 1 million members. These organisations signed up to a common manifesto, which was actually turned into a book called The Manifesto of the Real World, and all these organisations supported. But that manifesto was a profoundly radical statement of green politics and the measures that were needed to change the direction society was taking. It was a huge achievement to get all of those organisations, nominally single issue around aid, social justice, ecological protection, whatever, to sign up to a broad-based agenda. So it showed what is possible in terms of coalition building within our wider movement. It didn't go on, it didn't succeed, and I think there was a couple of reasons for that. And the main reason of which was that it didn't, the second stage, which was to exert real leverage on the political system, didn't work. A lot of those chief executives, senior members of these NGOs were worried about charity law, were worried about funding, were just generally worried about such a radical change in the way in which they organise. And it is difficult to get a lot of organisations to change the way they do things. There's a lot of vested interests within the green movement, as well as within, the world of macro politics and corporations. But it showed what is possible in terms of coalition building. And I think that is one of the themes that we have to look to
in building a new strategy. It's coalition building within that wider movement. The second is we have to look for what is effective. And we have to really be serious about this. If you think of all the campaigns, I have to say, from my experience of 40 years, that there's a lot of campaigning that goes on which is relatively self-indulgent. Okay, and I hope nobody takes personal offence at that. But I've seen an awful lot of campaigns where you can feel good about what you're doing, but actually you're not getting real results in the real world. So we have to be a bit disciplined about how we go about things. And that might well mean advocating certain types of non-violent direct action and not others. Supporting some things that work and actually saying to those things that aren't effective enough, I'm sorry, but you're welcome to do your own thing, but it's not what we need to really prioritize to be effective. So those are two things. We've got to be inclusive, we've got to welcome that broader movement. We need structures that pull people together. We need to choose those campaigns that are effective. We need to have things that happens on different levels, and we need to have things that happen nationally, regionally, and locally. What I envisage is local coalitions of campaigners, of businesses, of individuals, of people who pursue green lifestyles, who broadly share this outlook, to get together in large numbers and to put direct pressure. And when we look at the political and electoral system, imagine that in a constituency, what constituency are we in here? Is this still Somerton and Frome? Anybody here local? No? What? West Wiltshire. Okay, we're in West Wiltshire. Okay, imagine you had 300 people in West Wiltshire who were committed, come the next general election, to actively engage. You can start to affect outcomes. You can make safe seats into marginal seats. Marginal seats can change hands if people actively engage. Now, someone's going to tell me, oh, there's the gagging law, there's charity law.
I'm going to say, given where we are, we should mention Frome, where they've done that. The independence of Frome now controls the council.
Yeah.
Mayor of Frome, he's a cycling.
It's coming tomorrow.
Coming tomorrow.
I know. Pete McFadden.
Exactly, yes. I mean, they got together in the pub and thought, hang on, what should these national parties have? Why should they be controlling our local town? Maybe they shouldn't. Let's all run for independence.
Yeah.
10 out of the 17 won.
Yeah.
They're doing some good stuff.
Well, and Glastonbury now has a deputy Green Mayor. And I heard of a town in Wales called Kington, which is run by the Greens. And yeah, these things are spreading. But I would looking for something that was a national initiative, although applied locally, and for coalitions of people that can mobilise large numbers of people who will engage in the political process. And I think we're talking about negative leverage as well as positive leverage. By negative leverage, I mean that as well as helping people that are going to advocate certain policies to be elected, you need to demonstrate negative leverage, which means that certain characters, I don't know why, but at this point I often refer to Peter Lilly for some reason, there are certain characters we don't want anywhere near the House of Commons. All of right, we don't want them to have any kind of opinion. There are lots of them. You are quite right.
Too many to mention.
Yeah. But in terms of the politics of it, what you have to do is demonstrate that you can take scalps. That will in itself give you leverage. You might not be able to get rid of all of them, but if you can demonstrate by concentrating supporters in particular areas and running negative campaigns against individuals, that they can then lose their seat. That is negative leverage. And you imagine, well, I just think that, there was old Nick Clegg and his tuition fees, and he promised, didn't he? And he broke his promise on that. You're welcome to have a loud hiss at this point if you want. But no, I didn't think it wasn't loud enough. Anyway, there is always a problem with politicians who promise things and then don't deliver. So you need to build into this strategy mechanisms for, as far as possible, ensuring that politicians are obliged to stick to their promises. That means that the policies, the say 10 key points for action on climate change and biodiversity, are realistic. They are deliverable. They can be done within a fixed time span, and you make it something very real. And secondly, those people who have promised that they're going to sign up and back these things and introduce them into the House of Commons, they know that if they betray their promise, that there's a very good chance they will lose their seat next time. That's negative leverage, and that's a way of holding people to account. And you can do that in this country under the electoral system we've got. This is why we can't expect to change the whole system before we get changes. We have to work with what we've got. But we know and that if we mobilize, if people get active and get engaged, change can be delivered. And this is one of the biggest, probably the biggest single problem, is lack of self-belief, is apathy, is disenchantment. And green-minded people are saying either it's all too late or they're all the same, we can't do anything, and they don't engage. What we see is when enough people engage, and they engage on the right issue in the right way, change happens. So it really is about believing in our ability to affect change. Absolutely, this is one of the reasons I'm often very skeptic of conspiracy theories, just to introduce that into the mix. Because I do think sometimes conspiracy theories can have the effect of disempowering people. You think everything's all manipulated by some elite who's controlling everything, and that we can't do anything about that. Okay? Absolutely, I refute that. I think if people organise and they've got the right strategy, they can affect change. This is our home, it's our planet, and we have to believe in ourselves and our ability to make change happen. And I think that's probably enough from me. I don't know if that's 20 minutes or what it was, but please just throw rotten eggs or questions or anything else.
All fine, very well to get the right people into Parliament, but how much power does Parliament itself have? Surely we should be looking to influence multinational corporations, because they're probably the single greatest drivers of climate change.
I absolutely agree. In parallel with
we
Parliament,
need change in Parliament. I'm not saying you don't. But
in parallel with parliamentary action, you need extra parliamentary action. If you're pursuing a particular bill on a transport theme that's going to tackle climate change, for example, you now have to have targeted direct action, extra parliamentary work around exactly the same theme. And yes, you've absolutely got to work on the corporations and on the lobbyists. I mean, British politics has been captured essentially by corporations across the board.
I mean, that was the success of the GMO campaign. It was ultimately the large multinational corporations looked at it and thought, well, we ain't going to be able to sell GMOs in our supermarkets. No, we're not interested. Look, we're green.
Yeah.
And that's what they did. Merely because they saw that there was no profit in it.
No, I think it's quite fair to say that our governance is captured by the corporate state, and there are a whole range of obstacles set against us. But my history has involved campaigning against cruise missiles. Direct. I was there. I told you I think one of the last men out of Green and Common, and then I set up a second front, effectively, the campaign of Molesworth. Some of you around back in the 80s will remember that. That was an occupation of a cruise missile base, which led eventually to 3,000 soldiers being mobilised to evict the camp. The camp was evicted. It took all night. We got front page press everywhere, lead story, and then we spent the next 6 months on the road, continually going back to Molesworth. In other words, we created a second front in the campaign, and that summer Gorbachev and Reagan sat down and signed a deal to get rid of cruise missiles. And they cited as one of the reasons for doing that public opposition. And they clearly felt the depth of feeling, and also the how far people were willing to go to express their opposition. And that was a major issue where we took on the military-industrial complex, the Pentagon, etc., and we won. It can be done. And I think this again comes back to self-belief. If we do we want to just lie down and die? I think if there's a hope, and there clearly is a hope, and there are precedents where change has been achieved, even on major issues, then we have to use that hope, and we have to develop the political skills, and we have to have the courage to get out there and take the actions necessary. We have to engage in that horrible system called politics, because that is part of making change happen. You can't just have change on the streets. You need to have change inside the elected institutions as well, and in parallel with the action on the streets. Okay.
So, guys, can we, just to remind you, if we could, I think what will be really empowering potentially and reinforcing a lot of the things that we've been hearing from our first two speakers here. It seems like we're talking about unity of purpose, but also diversity of actions, and a big current that's coming through is about self-belief and self-organising, and being empowered in our political actions. So I think what would be really nice if we could just, Tamsin's going to speak.
Hold off questions, write it down.
You
are writing it down.
I know it's a slightly disruptive flow.
What's it called? It's not the elevator, the treadmill, exactly. And not seem like a weird bonkers hippie person, or seem to be any of those things that are so easily marginalised by all of those horrible mainstream media outlets that point at us and say, well, you're just weird, and you seem very happy, and that's kind of weird, and you like hanging around outside too much, and that's also weird. And so I left university, and I left university in the summer when Heathrow Airport was being expanded. It was kind of big national debate. It wasn't actually being expanded because they didn't get that one through yet. And there was this big national debate about it, and there was a climate camp that was happening outside Heathrow Airport. Do people have a vague recollection of this moment in time in my personal history, but also our shared activist history? And I went along to this climate camp, and I had never really been involved in radical environmental action before going there. I had a crush on someone, so that was kind of why I went. And now I find myself still in the movement, and they are working for a bank, so damn them. And I went along to the climate camp and immediately got involved in a group called Plain Stupid, and Plain Stupid did kind of cool, groovy actions. And I think what they were trying to do, whether they kind of knew it or not, was to reposition environmental activism as something quite young, quite fierce, maybe quite hot. And they were kind of really going out and talking to mainstream media, and I was put at quite a young age as a kind of spokesperson, and I think probably I was kind of used and abused by people in Plain Stupid who thought, yeah, the media would love her, and then they kind of threw me out to the media, and the media did love me, but they probably loved me because I had come from a posh university and I was a kind of pretty 21-year-old or whatever, rather than because of my deep, fundamental and well-spoken beliefs. So that was kind of an interesting time, and I guess I did truly believe that what we were doing was very important, but we were just doing a single issue. And what was quite nice about the aviation issue then was it was connected quite deeply to climate change, and that was something that was quite understood. It was kind of just before the economic mess happened, so there was still a kind of public appetite for talking about these things because it hadn't been all completely diverted. No, we don't have time to save the planet, we must restart the economy with fracking and other great things that will ensure a sustainable future for all. And so anyway, so I kind of got involved in that, and I was working with Plain Stupid, and we were kind of young and radical and fringe, and it was quite exciting, and we wouldn't use mobile phones, we'd only write to each other because we were sure that we were being watched by whoever, the system. And maybe we were being watched by the system, because the system does, does watch people. So not to belittle activist etiquette and things like that. But it was quite exclusive. Like you had to want to get involved, you had to be prepared to break the law, you had to see aviation as one of the most important things, or the expansion of aviation industry is one of the most important things and worth breaking the law for. There wasn't really a space in it for people who didn't already have access into that world. And it didn't feel that we weren't a model of how to create a better world. And we definitely weren't reaching out to people and saying, get involved with us. It was kind of like, if you're in the know, you can stay in the know. But if you're not involved, then you're part of the problem. And it was quite oppositional in that way as well. Like, we definitely felt that we were young, radical, cool, worthier than everybody. And if anyone didn't agree with us, instead of engaging with them and having a conversation, we were just like, irrelevant. So did that for a bit. Then I started a group called Climate Rush because I was kind of a bit bored of working with male activists, sorry. And this group, Climate Rush, was about kind of being more open to other people getting involved, and it was about kind of lowering the barrier to getting involved. It was a suffragette-inspired group, and it was kind of women-led, and basically we'd dress up as suffragettes and go and do protests together. So we went and had a picnic in Terminal 1 of Heathrow Airport, and it was kind of, you know, you didn't need to break the law, you just needed to come in an outfit and come to a place and then do something a bit performative. So it was kind of a lower entry level to having a fun time being an activist. So you didn't have to, you know, climb onto the roofs of Parliament and drop banners. It was more like, come to a space, dress up, be part of this kind of performative space. And that was really good, and I did that for a bit, and I think what I thought with that was this would be a really great way to get lots and lots of women involved in the movement, and this is like a nice way to talk to women about seeing this as the latest of a struggle that we have been fighting since time immemorial, which is just about you know, equality in a way, and equality of voices, and that every single social struggle depends upon the ones that have gone before it, and we learn from those struggles and we move forward, and it's not really lots of different battles, but kind of one big battle. And that was kind of an interesting time, and that did work quite well, but it wasn't doing the thing of actually getting hundreds of thousands of women out on the streets for whatever reason. And I think, you know, I think we were just another group. We were called Climate Rush. We were the group of radical feminists, kind of environmentalists. And then there was the other group, and the other group, and the other group. And I guess this is the thing, is like and again, you know, I think you would agree with me, it's like there's loads of different groups and we're all doing good things. And the Blessed Unrest is kind of part of that. It's, you know, it's an extraordinary movement that we live in, and there are all of these extraordinary things going on, but there is no one uniting thread. And so we were kind of another group, and we were doing what we were doing, and it wasn't as huge and successful as I wanted it to be, or as it could, you know, potentially could have been. And I stopped doing that because I got an offer for a job. It was a really nice job, so I started to go work for Lush, who are nice, and they kind of fund lots of stuff that's going on, whether or not you know about that. And whilst I was working for Lush, I started having conversations with a woman called Fanny, and she has been an environmental campaigner, activist, researcher since she left university, and she's about 50, so a bit older than me. And she was working with Dame Vivienne Westwood. And Dame Vivienne Westwood cares about climate change, and she's kind of been quite a strong voice in the anti-fracking movement, which is kind of strange for a luxury fashion brand, but obviously she is the radical punk, and then the fashion industry swirls around her. And she has this thing called Climate Revolution. And Climate Revolution is, I mean, I was like, wow, Dame Vivienne Westwood's doing something, that's very cool. Wouldn't it be amazing if whatever she did for the safety pin, she did for climate change? Like, if she made some, you know, if she could find a symbol that would speak to environmentalism and to that kind of energy and that anarchic energy, and pulled it into the mainstream so that it's, you know, essentially what she did with punk. And we kind of started speaking to her, and that's when I met Fanny, because Fanny was also working with her. And Dame Vivienne Westwood has this thing which she calls the face of war. And the face of war is a symbol, and it is an unsmiling face. So it has a kind of big black eye punched in the face, and then this kind of unsmiling face. And she puts it on her models when they walk down the catwalk. So she has these kind of fashion shows with Climate Revolution written across her t-shirt, and then this big black eye, and then this weird moustache kind of drawn around the top lip. And she had this event in one of her shops where she was inviting people to come and get the face of war drawn on them. And everyone was like, I like the eye, but I don't really want the unsmiling face bit. But she wasn't really having any of that. She was very much like, no, you've got to have it all. This is my idea. So everyone kind of left with this big unsmiling face and this circle around the eye. But during this day of sitting in Conduit Street in the Vivienne Westwood shop watching these poor people who just wanted to go and get their bag or whatever be jumped on by Vivienne Westwood and have this face drawn around their thing and this smile and unsmile. I looked at myself in the mirror and I'd wiped off this bit and I just saw this kind of eye around my face, around my eye, and I thought, like, this is kind of cool. This looks quite good, and I can kind of imagine people putting this on, and there aren't really very many barriers to putting it on, because you can do it with a marker, or you can do it with a lipstick, or you can do it with a bit of, like, there were some people who have just they're in Japan and they've just done it with a bit of oil, and they've just kind of, not oil but molasses, but something that looks like oil. They've done this thing. Some people in Germany did it with a bit of coal, and they kind of smudged coal around their face. And I was like, yeah, this looks good, and also it's like, it's kind of telescopic. It's like, you know, there are so many symbols in the world that are kind of weird power bases have this eye symbol, like, who are they called? The Illuminati or something? Like, everyone's got a bloody eye in their symbol. But this is quite a nice one, because actually if anyone can do it and anyone can have access to it, and then we're kind of turning it on positions of power and people who have power, and we're saying, actually, you know what, we're watching you this time. This isn't a surveillance society, this is like counter-surveillance, and we're going to watch you, and we're going to hold you to account, and we're going to judge you, and we're going to symbolically stand together, because if I wear an eye here, then I'm connected to somebody who's wearing an eye in Japan, to somebody who's wearing an eye in Brazil, and we're going to, you know, feel that we are connected, that we are one circle, and that we are standing together, united, to hold people in power to account and to watch them and to make sure that they know that they are being judged. So, like, this idea of going to constituencies and creating these kind of hubs in constituencies next year, it would be great to have people outside the houses of Eric Pickles wearing this symbol and just saying, well, what are you going to do about my future? Like, why have you cancelled this many wind projects? Or why have you done this and this and this? And I think it's quite an emotional thing. So I guess what we started thinking, or Fanny started thinking, because she's very clever and she kind of has done lots of research and things like this, whereas I'm just kind of energetic, is she started thinking that really what it was is we have like a communications challenge with climate change. You know, it's like there are so many diverse targets, and there's so many diverse bits of information and science and policies and this and that and that, and actually it's a really emotional story. It's about the end of the world. It's about whether we can see this crisis as an opportunity for us as a species to come together to react to this context that we have created. And that's like the best Hollywood blockbuster ever. And that is a story that I want to be part of. I don't want to be the part of the conversation where I have to explain the science that I don't really understand myself to somebody. I want to be part of the one where I'm just fighting back because it's clear that there are things going on that are wrong. And so I guess this thing of kind of trying to seed a symbol which hits people in different places, from things like science or policy or research. It's just about saying we are connected and we want to watch people in power, and we want to make sure they feel held to account, and that we are connected in our creativity as well. We can variously put this on. You could put it on in Diamante or like whatever. You can, you know, and I think that kind of interpretation where a symbol allows you to interpret it in whichever way you want. So the creativity thing I think is key, of like, you know, it would be great to go to all of the places that are real utopias and get photos of people saying like, this is a fucking real utopia, and I stand connected to all those other real utopias. And that's something that we've kind of been doing. Like, we haven't actually launched this thing. It's called The Future, by the way. It has a website. It's thefuture.net, because we're a network, not a movement or a campaign or a this or a that. We're just a network of people who will wear this circle, and it's something that you can do additionally, and we're not really trying to be or create anything that you have to be a part of or join in on. It's like, whatever you're doing anyway, just put a circle around your face if you believe that you're part of this fight. Anyway, it's going to be interesting to see if it takes off. But we haven't launched properly. What was I saying? It's not really for you to tell me what I was saying, is it? Oh yeah, okay. We've been doing this thing for about the last 6 months. Both me and Fanny have now quit our jobs to work on this full time. I think, you know, it's worth like with all of these things, it's just worth seeing if it works. And I think we've given ourselves until the end of the elections next year. And if people are wearing this symbol, and if people kind of are going to places and asking difficult questions of politicians, or if you see it on catwalks and people kind of who are involved in the cultural industries are interpreting it in these creative ways, if it's on bands on stages at festivals, it's like then we'll know that it's going somewhere and we'll feel like, okay, this is great, this is a good idea. But if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. It's just worth a punt to try and like fill a symbol with all of the narrative that is happening right now. And there are so many different narratives, but if it can just be united by a symbol that anyone can take on their face, that'd be quite interesting. Anyway, so one thing that we've been doing is we went, and also what's amazing is that the uptake of this. So I guess I do have quite an international network of kind of climate changey people and activists, and I've been posting stuff that we've been doing with this circle around the face online. And from me posting stuff and it being shared on Facebook, we now have a group in Australia who see themselves as the future Australia and who are kind of pushing it. We have a group in Tokyo who see themselves as the future Japan and are kind of pushing it. We've got a group in Sao Paulo who see themselves as the future Brazil and are pushing it. In Berlin, we've got the future Germany. In France, we've got the future France. And so it's kind of like this weird thing where and I guess this is the niceness of something that people can invest in and build their own meaning in, their own relationship with, and is not actually another bit of work for them. It's just that they are going out and being climate activists anyway, so now they're doing it with this around their face. It has kind of sparked, and it seems like, so now we're working towards an official launch, which is going to be on September the 23rd, when a very important UN meeting is happening in New York, that will probably not be reported by any of the media, and probably the leaders who go along to it won't feel that they need to be held to account, because they won't feel that they are being watched, or that there's anybody really protesting for change. So that's a moment when we are going to all go out and do whatever it is we want to do across the countries wearing this symbol. And I think what I want to do is get as many people in Parliament as possible in the grand lobby bits, which is the bit that the public can go into, kissing wearing the symbol, because I just think that's kind of funny and weird and creative and all of these sorts of things. And I think it is about seeing you don't have to protest. Maybe you can just do a dance somewhere, but if you wear this circle, then you're connecting yourself to many stories. And or you could. There's a group of free runners who have started wearing this symbol in London. You're like, great, like you are anarchic and interesting and disruptive. So just do what you're doing, and you can be connected to a kind of climate change fight just by virtue of wearing the symbol. Anyway, the final thing I'll say is something we've been doing is going around and actually getting images of people who are on the front line of climate change, to really try and deepen the symbol, because a symbol isn't a symbol unless there's a depth and meaning to it, and we don't want it to just become another wristband, but one that you put on your face, because there is that risk of it, and we kind of do want it to go as big as that, as big as a meaningless wristband, but actually to have a very solid foundation and depth of meaning. So we've been going around to communities who are on the front line of climate change. It started in January when we just went to Somerset and knocked on doors of people who were massively flooded, and asked if they would allow us into their house to take these took a really amazing photographer with us, and just asked if they would mind painting the symbol on their face and sitting in their houses. And there are these great images of people kind of up to here in their houses or up to here in the fields with the symbol around the eye. And then in Brazil at the moment there's a drought, because obviously there's a fucking drought because there are a million climate change impacts happening all around the world, and they are organising to get a group of kids to go out to the drought field, which used to be a reservoir but is now just cracked earth, and they will go and stand there with the symbol around the eye. And in Japan there are kind of flash floods happening at the moment, and the group there are going to go and going to get images of people standing with the symbol in the eye. And then when bloody Sydney, like Australia summer happens, and there will inevitably be a million bushfires, that will be a moment when you can go out and invite those people to wear it as well. And you can't force this stuff. Either the story will, or the idea of being part of this thing that is happening and being connected to these other communities that's happening to will take, and people will want to do this, or they won't, and it won't take, and it's not the worst thing in the world, it's just another attempt. But I'm having fun with it, and I think it is interesting, and I think if you want to get involved with it, then that would be lovely.
area of life, of human life, that isn't actually being addressed, which is why we ended up in this situation, what's driving, you know, and you can stem that back to agriculture and to principal ideas of separation, and some of the language that's seen by campaign groups and politicians is this idea of separation, that like the thing we're trying to save is the planet or the environment. It's like separate from us, and the more we kind of see ourselves as being separate from something, even if it's seemingly doing a positive thing, like trying to protect the planet, actually the more we kind of realise that we are part of that, then the more you want to look after it in the first place. So it's not just a case of changing politicians so that they can regulate carbon emissions, and it's all about measurement, you know, like actually it's coming from, I don't know if anyone was in the talk this morning, which is about actually taking it away from the head and actually putting it down here and feeling it, because you can measure as much as you want, but until you're actually feeling the impact of what we're doing and feeling that connection to the ground and the earth and the water, then no one's gonna, those changes aren't really gonna happen, you know?
I'd say something like that.
Can I jump in first? Yeah, my one's a quick. It's just a, this is I don't use the word environment or environmental politics, because your environment is your surroundings. It's a very anthropocentric concept. And I always like to use the word ecology, because ecology is about interrelationships, it's about the web, it's about holism. So ecological politics is really what we want, not environmental politics.
I wish the Green Party was still the ecology party.
Wasn't it the
Much better brand.
Different issue. I don't quite agree with you on that one.
There is a thing around why that separation. Another talk that I've done in the past is about the commons and enclosures. And when the enclosures first happened, as that land became privatised, it then became seen as a resource to exploit, rather than this common treasury that we looked after to ease ourselves. And that very much tied in at the same time with ideas around, you know, from the Enlightenment and this way of thinking about the world as a machine, you know, this idea of the machine, and you use this machine and that sort of thing. And I'm just currently reading the new book by Capra called The Systems View of Life. And what I find really interesting in that is that when you have a paradigm shift in science, which we are seeing now, you know, with this, you know, with the quantum physics and the interconnectedness, and you know, the fact that everything is, you know, impacts on each other, that sends a ripple usually through, well, has in the past, sends a ripple through the changing consciousness within society and within the way that we organise how things are done. And I do think we are beginning to see that, you know, it's, you know, through the commons being more talked about, collaboration, gift economies, all these sorts of things which are much more about that sort of view, that scientific, which tie in much more with its interconnectedness. My concern is it going to happen quick enough? And also, I think politics, you know, I think they're extremely effective, the government and the people in power at the moment, in doing what they want to do, which is basically extract and enclose as much wealth and resource for themselves as possible before the shit hits the fan. You know, if you look at what the austerity agenda is about, there is no such thing as austerity. You know, don't need austerity. It's a myth. You know, it's an excuse for rich people and the ruling class to extract as much resource as they can out of the system now, using those positions of power. I don't, you know, and they're very effective at that. You know, like they're just about to privatise the one train line which is in public ownership, which makes £1 billion a year. They go, yeah, we need to privatise that. You know, so they can extract that money.
But I mean, there's been talk of kind of, obviously, what's the most efficient and quick way to create change in order to affect climate change. But unless you actually change the way you see the world, you know, the lens that you're looking at the world through, then that change won't be lasting, because, you know, you can change the political system and you can change the party and they can enforce green, but if everyone isn't actually looking at life through the lens of, you know, I shouldn't be shitting in clean water, and, you know, we shouldn't be growing crops on this huge scale and covering them in chemicals and all these things. If people don't have a genuine connection to that, then it will always be an external thing that we can treat it in whatever way we want. So, like, it is a massive change, because it's a whole change in the way we are as human beings. But, you know, it's kind of like the planet's going to be fine. Like, it's us that we need to think about, and the rest of life. But I mean, you know, actually the best thing for the planet is for humans to disappear, because we're very destructive. I don't believe that is our nature. I don't believe that can't change. But, you know, our behaviour, that's an indication that if our behaviour doesn't change, then, you know, it's...
Could I... Basically, I think I wouldn't go so far as to say it's only humans that got a problem. I think when you're in a runaway climate scenario, that will affect all life. As temperatures increase, habitats become uninhabitable progressively.
The planet,
we lose more and more species. Well, it depends what you mean by life. When you start to see the chemical balance in the atmosphere changing, and when you start to see so many aspects of life disappearing, then I don't think we can just say, oh, life will carry on without human beings. Not in a world of runaway climate change. And the other thing I want to pick up is the issue of austerity, because I think people often misunderstand that, or they take just a solely socialist view on that. We're living a three-planet lifestyle in this country. So we have to have ecological austerity. We have to produce less, consume less, and live more simply. And that is a type of ecological austerity. We need it. With it, of course, if we're using less, we have to distribute and share more
quality of austerity.
What we have. So let's have common treasury. Let's have common ownership. Let's have more sharing. Let's have greater equality. But together with that, it is contract and converge. You can't just have the converging without the contraction on a finite planet. That was it.
But surely the most powerful thing we can do is take responsibility for our own lives. You know, I look at this, I'm wearing plastic boots. Where does that come from? Where is it made? You know, the life I lead, what I consume, where it comes from, how I deal with the people who provide me with what I need to live, what I produce and how I interact with the people who I provide with things. That's the single most powerful thing we can do as individuals.
I don't know. I think
everyone needs to do that.
And it's a start. It's where it starts, because how on earth can you turn around to somebody else and say, you shouldn't be doing this, you should be doing that, when you're not doing it yourself?
Yeah, starting from a point of integrity helps.
But
I think it's about
as soon as the guilt gene comes in, and we
It's
do
not guilt,
that
it's
from a point
it's
of
practicality.
sacrifice,
It's not guilt.
then we find it difficult to bring others with us.
It's
and
not guilt.
it's not enough for us to say, I've sacrificed, what do you do? We have to make that journey exciting, adventurous. This is the greatest change for man. And the wonderful thing about climate change is it links mankind and the world together. And in a way, we're blessed to be facing this problem.
And there is a difficult, because of course we're all hypocrites in one way or another, right? None of us is going to be Mr. or Mrs. Perfect Green. You know, we're all going to be doing something a little bit naughty at some point, aren't we?
it's about what
You know,
choices
how
we
many
have
people
both
here have
of
flown
us.
on an aeroplane in the last year? I bet there's some of you in the room here, you know. Yeah, look, you see, you know, some of us have come a very long way on an aeroplane. But that isn't helping the planet. But it doesn't mean we don't engage, and we don't talk, and we don't seek to change, because we might not have managed to change our holiday plans. We're still taking flights, but we can change the food we eat. You know, we can eat less meat. You know, I would say the same. If you know, if I'm still eating a little bit of meat,
does that mean that I can't actually advocate vegetarianism, you know, as a policy broadly?
No, I just think it's not a point of view of guilt. What it is, it's a point of view that if you're going to advocate something, you have to be able to stand up to some degree of scrutiny yourself.
Yes, I think to be on the path is important yourself.
No,
and it's also because the personal is political and the political is personal. You know, you have to embody your principles in your own life. That's really important just for integrity. Yeah.
It's like David Cameron telling us to go green.
Doesn't talk about that much now, does he?
No, he talks about green crap, but there we go, yeah.
Green mush, isn't it?
My point was less about all the guilt tripping, whether it was the issue I was having was that's the most we can do, and that which of course it isn't, and if that's all we do, it cannot be enough. You know, we have to think about the big picture. So I'm part of the Eco Land Co-op, who did a community share issue and bought a bit of land quite near here. We got planning last year for 3 eco small holdings. It's great. And my friend, colleague Tom, who constantly thinks on the big issue, to the extent that he's like, there's no point in not flying, because that doesn't actually change anything, it just makes the fly cheats for someone else, and then they fly, and you know, there's another whole debate. But he was like, well, how much time, and how long, and how much money is it going to take to buy the whole country back? Because yeah, we surely want the whole country to be one big ecological cooperative in some regards. So I thought that was a good question, so I did some back of the envelope sums. What's the average price of land? How much land is there? How much is for sale every year? And I worked out that even if, like, it wouldn't take much actually, if we all put like 2p a day, I think I worked out. If every adult in the country put 2p a day in a pot, we could buy all the land that is for sale every year. And that's, if we did that, the price would go up. You know, got to assume a few things stay safe. But even if we did that, the problem is only 0.6% of the land is for sale in any one year. Most land hasn't changed hands since the land registries come into existence.
Since they stole it from us.
Yeah.
Basically. We'll just have it back, thanks for nothing. That's what should happen.
Exactly.
It's ours anyway. It was ours.
Even if we bought it all back, every bit that is for sale, like if Eco Land Co-op got as big as it could get, it would still take 333 years to buy it all back. And I think everyone in this room kind of understands, and Dave was trying to nail home, that we don't have 333 years.
You put 20p in. That makes it 33 years, doesn't it?
Something like that.
I'm up for that.
So
Can afford that. This guy's had his hand up for a while.
That's what you need to do, is to make sure that money isn't worth anything.
We need to keep buying land and have land reform.
Yeah.
I just want to say something, which is I think that we are all working with a faulty model of how the world works, because we kind of assume that it's something that we understand with rational mind, and that we're, that we push in this direction and it moves in that direction, and that doesn't happen. So what is really effective? Well, I'm not entirely sure what is really effective. I can tell you what has been effective on me. For example, I don't know how many people know the story The Man Who Planted Trees, for example. Anybody who knows that story? The Man Who Planted Trees. Yeah? A lot of people know, quite a few people know. Well, I read that when I was about 20, I suppose, and it made me decide to become an ecologist and change the course of my life. So it was effective on me, and it's been effective on a lot of other people, that particular story. So, the guy who wrote that story did a good week's work, or however long it took him to write it. On the other hand, you can be struggling and talking and working for a very long time and achieve nothing. And this afternoon I could have been over there helping to build a roof, and decided sitting here listening to people talking and talking to myself, and I'm not sure that I've actually achieved anything. Whereas if I'd been over there, I would know that I would have actually put some bits of wood together anyway, for what it's worth. And this is the kind of reasoning that has led me to spend most of the last 8 years as a self-builder. Because at least I know that I'm doing something, even if it's only a very small movement, but I'm moving slowly in the right direction, instead of, moving quickly in a direction that I don't know whether it's the right direction or not. People are talking about being effective and also about being efficient and being quick. I don't think you can be all three. you know, what's the quickest and most effective way of creating an oak tree? Well, actually, there is no quickest way. You know, there's an effective way. You have to plant it and protect it while it's small, and then it'll grow of its own accord. But it will grow at its own pace. And that I think the oak tree is the model that we, or the tree, is the model that our, you know, one of the models that our kind of movement has to be using. So, you know, we've planted a lot of seeds, and are they now, you know, able to protect themselves? Well, it's going to plant some more and protect those while they're little, you know. But we can't think, you know, is this action going to affect the world in that direction or in this direction? We just don't know. There's so much that we just don't know. You know, the world is all that big interconnected entity, and bits of it push different directions. We don't know what's going on all the time.
Talk about effectiveness. One of the things that I feel is a bit frustrating is that everything I'm quite involved with transition movement, and you know what's happening here, and alternative ways of being happening all over the planet, and there is communication happening between all our different groups, but it's not getting out there. And talking to Joe Bloggs in the street, family, whoever, who've never heard of Off-Grid Festival, transition movement, whatever it is, and I think we need more media focus so that when you turn on the telly, it's on the news. Oh, there's this festival happening there. What's this festival about? It's about this. And people get to know that there is hope. You know, there's all this terrible stuff that they're hearing about in the media, a lot of which they don't understand but can find out about. But then, well, where does that leave us? You know, what do we do about this? Because the politicians are useless, but we don't know about anything else that's going on. And I think it's really important that we try and concentrate on getting the solutions that we're working on out there, so that the majority can find out about
I
them.
think
And I think it's for the Green Party as well.
Well,
We all vote. If we vote the Green Party.
To
But
be honest,
talking to your mum and dad or whoever, neighbour.
it's not talked about often enough.
Yeah.
Media ownership in Britain is concentrated in the hands of about 5 individuals,
That's what we need to be
and they control it. They control something like 80% of the mass media that goes out, and thereby they're controlling what people prioritise, what they're thinking about. They're just you know, why are we discussing why did UKIP get so much airtime? You know, during the last European elections. Why is immigration topping the headlines? Why is climate change never really discussed in the mainstream media? You know, there's questions after question. You just got to look at the agenda of the people who actually control the media. And I think that's why I would say that amongst the 10 most important things we can do to tackle climate change is actually to address media ownership, and to make sure that people who own, for example, as a good policy, that people who own media in Britain need to be domiciled in Britain, and to limit the amount of media that anybody can own. What is it? How much of the UK media does Rupert Murdoch own? Something like 37%. You know, I think we should bring that right down to say 10%. You know, no one person can control more than 10%. It would be a good start, wouldn't it? And then, as well as encouraging new voices to come into the media, to grant licenses to new groups to bring forward new radio stations and new TV outlets and all the rest of it. I think there's a lot that could be done. It's not being done. Where are the direct action campaigns outside, you know, ITN and the Murdoch papers? You know, we're focusing on aeroplanes and, you know, what seems to us to be the priority issues, but then they get very little coverage in the mainstream media, so nobody knows what we're doing. So, you know, focusing on the media has to be part of, you know, the big picture, and that has to be done urgently as well.
There is, just in case people don't know, there is a thing called Let's Buy the News, which is a campaign to buy the Times from Murdoch. They're
Wow.
okay, 100 million. They're going for it.
It is definitely urgent, and just a little example. I went to film for Positive TV, which I invite you to take a look. It's positivetv.tv. We try to. We've been off for a while. We're picking up again. We have very little resources right now, but hopefully it'll grow. And just one example, in 2011, I went to film the London Peace Awards, which was just brilliant. All of these amazing people and movements doing mainly all the winners were involved in community, in their local community, in improving and developing their community. And if you go online and you look, if you search for London Peace Awards, and it was even hosted by the mayor, we were the only ones with a camera there filming, which is just unbelievable. And this is just a little example to reinforce what you were saying. That's vital, that in terms of the big picture, the percentage of ownership comes down, and also everyone can definitely get more involved. Personally, I wake up, I'm connected I go to the news through Facebook, for example.
Yeah.
So I filter my news. So I wake up and I read Mother Earth News Network, not CNN, MNN. Yeah. Positive news. Also, so I start my day already with those concepts. So I think everyone can start slowly, can do that. And also, hopefully, if you like our project, we're just in the process of, we're just starting 2 weeks ago. So we have very little resources.
That's probably why you're smiling. Absorbing all this positive news.
It's true. Thank you. And no, but learning with people like you, that's where I get the smile and gives hope. So we're very small right now, but hopefully, and if you like, the invitation is there as well.
Good.
And we only appear to be very small. We're only appearing to be very small because actually it's organised crime on the one hand, the Rupert Murdochs, etc., versus the disorganised majority, and the majority is vast. It will be at least 99% of the population is the disorganised majority. But we're not psychotically fixated on organising and controlling, we're relaxing and enjoying ourselves. But it's largely because we haven't assumed our own personal empowerment and realize that everything we do makes a difference, individually and collectively, and we actually hold all the cards, all the trumps and everything. Should we realize our own personal empowerment and activate it, individually and collectively? We already have everything we need.
They're only empowered.
Could this person, had a point, and then someone else over here?
Just made me think about social network as a kind of creative manifestation of networking. It's very easy to vilify it, and I think there are some really good reasons for doing that, and it's also at risk of being taken over by people who want to sell stuff, and it's worrying about how young people are seeing themselves. But it's also really powerful. It's like a way of putting a message, and then you never know what happens to it afterwards. But I think like the book that you read that sparks something, or for me it was watching Garbatory at university, like one documentary that then sort of sends you off down a different path. And there's so many things that do maintain the motivation to carry on, even though I feel really hungover because I've drank too much last night. Not one to talk about efficiency or effectiveness. But from listening to you, I feel like actually I do know a lot of stuff, and I've got to put it out there and be courageous enough to handle the emotions. It makes me feel really nervous talking about it, because it's so important and it's so tragic, the things that we're listening to, but it's also there's so much really good stuff. Like this festival is amazing because it just refills you with that sense that yes, I'm alive and have the power to use my voice or whatever to spread these good messages. So social media is just a tiny part of that. The conversations that we have, the self-care that we do to ourselves to be able to be effective and to use that little bit of the rational brain and but also the sort of spiritual insight into the independable things, which is so hard to get with your rational brain, but actually is also part of the story. So, good stories.
And you have a good speaking voice, by the way.
Someone over here had their hand up, I think. Did they? Yeah.
I don't remember what I wanted to say. I wanted to say lots of things, but I work with urban youth in Camden and Brixton, and what they're worried about and what they're concerned about is generational poverty. So I think it goes back to what you were saying. I think if we can find a common language that taps into the things that people are concerned about and help them to understand that everything is connected. Poverty is because of this. All the different things, the
Yeah, I have a nice project that I work with down in Newham, around London City Airport, and I mean, airports are put in places where there is where there are loads of other problems, because it's you know, it means that they're not going to get any resistance as they expand. So it's a very vulnerable community, hugely diverse, very young, loads of unemployment. And I've been working there for about 5 years, and I went in there as a kind of environmental activist campaigning against the expansion of London City Airport. And then after doing a bit of campaigning, I started knocking on doors and talking to people. And it was kind of the most important, this bit of my like activist whatever is like was the most important journey that I'd ever gone on, because it became very clear very quickly that the airport was a symptom of a deeper problem, that that these kids are just being left out and marginalised. And I mean, it's amazing, like they're not, so Westfield, the new Stratford Westfield, these kids aren't allowed to go in there. It's like, because if kids of more than groups of 3 go into it, and if they're wearing hoodies, then they're allowed to be chucked out by security. It's like, this has been, you know, their housing estates were demolished to put this thing up, and now they're not even allowed in it. Anyway, talking to them about this future thing, and talking to them about the future and about the future that they might want to create and how they might get involved in the creation of that. It's like, that conversation it's a real conversation, it's a live conversation, it's a creative conversation with them, and they're kind of interpreting it through music and interpreting it through different ways, and it's just it's so much more solid, and I feel on such more solid ground to now say, and also, you know, this airport is expanding, and it's not right that it should expand into your area, and it's not right the impacts that it's having on you, and you can, you know, if we want, we can do something about this, and we can resist it, and all these sorts of things. But that conversation, like, you can't have it until you've had a much bigger conversation, and yeah, I think it is key that we don't just, you know, I think a lot, I've heard this from so many platforms, is like, how do we make the environmental movement relevant? And you're like, what is this relevance thing that you speak of? It's like, you just are relevant by having conversations with people about real issues. It's like, it's not some like, you know, golden bullet of relevance that if we can just be relevant, like, you know, yeah, so I agree. It's like, let's talk about real things.
That conversation that you're having, say, in, you know, wherever in London,
yeah,
about the environment, I mean, it's very easy to discuss the environment in a place like this, right? I mean, how does the environment, how does ecology play into the sort of discussion that you have about that in a city, London? How does it work?
I talk to people about food. That's a really good way to start talking to someone, especially the types of young people I work with. They don't have a great diet, but you know, they have this passion for wanting to have a better life, and they don't really understand why they can connect to school, because I am clever, but everyone tells me I'm not, just because I don't have that paper. And I just found out that this one man owns all these media. Why are all these people allowed this to happen? And I've got a 17-year-old asking you why you allowed that to happen. It's a really, really hard question to try and answer. And then sometimes it's removing them from their urban environmental. I mean, there's a lot of London, we're really lucky, there's lots and lots of little projects going on. So you can not just talk to somebody about the theory of it, you can actually place them in front of, I mean, I can't throw anything to save my life, but I can put people in front of other people. There are lots and lots of resources. It's just finding that one thing, that one spark that will interest that person enough to pursue their own path of learning. Because that's what it's about. If I'm interested in having something, I'll go and find out about it. So yeah, a lot of the time, and sometimes it's about mental health, like why do I feel so shit? You know, well, you know, what's your sphere of experience, and how can you widen that, and what are the things that you want to feel like, and how do other people gain that? Sometimes, I mean, actually the whole political situation right now, my young people are like, I get to vote, guess what I'm going to do? You know, and then they're looking at all the political parties, and they're investigating, and they're really not happy. And these are strong people who are very opinionated. I was opinionated. And one of them went and stood in local elections earlier, and now she won. Because basically all her mates voted for her, and I just want to see what she's going to do. And I was like, oh my god, I interviewed you for a job and you couldn't even get through 10 minutes of the interview, and you're now like locally elected. And it's amazing. So there's all this like new energy coming. And I love these kinds of things, but I also hate them because they're not representative of my day-to-day life. The things that I immerse myself in. I want to see my young people and all their young people here, and I want to see their parents and their grandparents, and I want to find that way of getting them so excited that they're like, you know, walking here if they have to. So I'd love to kind of find a way of how, because I think that's where the effectiveness comes in. You know, we can't be effective if we're just talking to ourselves.
Mate. Just something I just read recently about by this guy called George Lakoff, and it's all about how you frame stories. And he says the reason that the left, like, he basically puts out this, he put this about Obamacare, and he said, here's 8 points. This was the Democrats' defence of Obamacare, which effectively is going to give loads of people healthcare for nothing, right? And it was like 8 points of why it's good, 8 points why it's myths, and 8 points about something else. And he puts these all up on the screen, and then he went, right, anyone remember them in the audience? And everyone was like, ugh. And then he went, right, this is what the Republicans said. State decides when you die. Lack of freedom. That was their counter argument, right? Something like death by, yeah, the state decides. And what he said is that when the Tea Party or the right wing get up, they don't look at like polls and they don't look at the things. They get up and they go, right, our ideology is this, and our story is this. And what the left tends to do is go, oh, let's see how we can get those few people to come on our side. And we're like trying, you can see it now with the Labour Party going, oh, we're tough on immigration, we're tough on benefit claims, we're tougher than them, we're tougher than UKIP, or all this. What you're not seeing is, and the Greens do it to a degree, but they don't get the media coverage. But what his argument is that you have to reframe and use your own language. So he's saying, like, if you even talk about, if you use their language, like, so you say we're against austerity, because austerity has been so banged into the consciousness, it reinforces their frames. So you're constantly reinforcing the opposition's ideas by using their language. So we need to create our own language, our own stories, our own ways of, you know, it's about, you know, groups of people getting together and creating change. Look at all these brilliant groups, the Peasants' Revolt. Look at these, you know, commoners who fought the enclosures, you know, because they've all got theirs. They got their Richard Bransons. Look at Richard Branson, is he brilliant? You know, we should all aspire to be this. You know, we need our own frames of reference. And, you know, the world would be better for most people, so the change is going to be better. You know, less consumerism, less mental health problems. You know, we haven't got much to lose. We have, compared to like people in, you know, other countries, our consumption has to come down. But in terms of, like, you know, really, social change would mean we have a much better life. We probably work a lot less. We have more leisure time. We have more social time, less pressure. So that's what we need to be selling people, like you know, yes, you can have a much better life, where you have much more control. But where do you see? We don't see that very often. It's difficult, and I think it ties into your thing about everyone getting together and saying, here's what could be. Because the one book I read was called Tina, and he said Tina is there is no alternative. That's what you hear all the time. There's no alternative. Yeah. There's no alternative. Yeah. So let's get rid of Tina.
Just on that note about, we've been talking about effective organisation and you know, alternatives, and there's loads of amazing ideas and different perspectives that are really valuable. I just want to remind people, but maybe you don't know, but that this event, this whole platform, actually is not a good example of effective organisation. Actually, it's like every other festival in this country that I know of. It's a reproduction of a capitalist model. There's producers and there are consumers. And actually this year, we talk about the urgency and how, 40 years of a green narrative and, something needs to happen and there's so many greens in this country, and yet some fairly experienced festival organisers have failed to sell 200 tickets for this event. And there's a massive shortfall, and it won't happen next year unless what we're trying to encourage now is to make this event an economic democracy. An open cooperative, effectively, a multi-stakeholder cooperative, and inviting the people who come to the event as speakers and workshop facilitators and stage owners or whatever else, and the people who come as participants to participate in a more significant way, to feed back, to sense your environment and feedback and effectively self-organise. I think it's important to remind ourselves always that this stuff isn't really cut and dry. This idea that there's consensus, that we share, when we do share a huge amount in common, but that whether that translates to effective organisation is a massive, massive question. And I think it doesn't a lot of the time. And this is just a great example. That on many levels, we probably, I hope that, certainly for me, it's been transformational already. This event is just these few days here. And I hope it will be for other people, and the conversations will spill out of this space and then spill out of the festival and go on and on and on and on. But even at the level of coming together in a field for a few days, this is not an example of effective organisation. I think there's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of space, and there's an open invitation for us to do some of that work. But I think basically what I'm saying is just to remind ourselves that the political is not divorced in any way. It just reinforces that whole narrative of separation if we think of the political as something separate from our everyday lives and our everyday interactions. This is itself a political action, just being here in this space together in communication. We're going to talk a bit more about all of that if you're interested in becoming part of a cooperative who organise this event and potentially others on Sunday afternoon in this space. Is there anyone who hasn't spoken yet, who would like to express themselves?
I would like to talk a bit about how the environment that we actually, the man-made environment, the suburbs and the cities and stuff that we live in are actually just continuing to push the lifestyle that we live. It's not going to be a quick change to change those sorts of places, but ultimately we are building consumer products for a consumer lifestyle, and if you're living in that environment, then it's really hard to start changing your lifestyle for the better. I personally hate the cottage-style houses that are being put up all over the country that are exactly the same from one town to the next. The suburbs is, although it's nice to have a bit of private space and stuff, it's not particularly efficient in the way it works. There's loads of things that need to be addressed, but I mean that is long-term things, and I suppose we need to change our lifestyle first, and then that would actually naturally follow. But it's just we're surrounded by this system, and no one is in control of it, and maybe we need to take control of it, because, well, the people who are at the top are at the top because they want to be at the top. If they didn't want to be at the top, someone else would be at the top who did want to be there. It's because that place at the top exists. And
can I just give you an example? I don't know whether you talked about this. Local democracy up the road here in Frome, where a town of 25,000 kicked out the politicians and put up independent candidates who took control of the council. And they've been looking through their neighbourhood plan, which is a government licence for neighbourhoods to take more control of their environment. It's exactly that question of, well, why is this lovely medieval town now surrounded by housing estates created by volume house builders, which really have no integral value. And they have now developed a very clear strategy to try and limit the borders and further encroachment and expansion. How successful they will be, but an independent council acting through the ballot box, you know, have broken through, and you know that is a great example. So we can take that and take heart from it and say, okay, if a town of 25,000 people can do that, then maybe things aren't as black. We can affect a change.
Absolutely, there needs to be more neighbourhood planning to head in the right direction. It's something that I've looked into quite a lot. It needs to be community led, and there just isn't the infrastructure to do it. You can get grants to employ someone to get, you know, but you need to have a community trust come together and get the ball rolling. You need, maybe if it's just one person, a community champion who leads the drive, and people can back someone. It's that stuff, because there's only been half a dozen that have been, you know, neighbourhood plans that have actually been successful in a referendum. I think there's probably another half a dozen that are being developed at the moment. But this is the first opportunity that people have got to actually take control of how their areas develop.
To come and self-build there, and that messed up all their figures because they thought they were going to sell that plot, and they haven't sold it, and so now they can't pay back that loan. And, I mean, obviously there are, in places like this, probably nearly half the people in this room would like to self-build.
Well, I've heard stories the other way.
Yeah.
I've heard of shortage of self-built sites. And,
definitely.
You know, I think that maybe in Cornwall that might be a one-off. I don't know the detail, but I think it's more normally the case that there's more people wanting to do it than there is opportunity.
Or at least have some input, so there's this big growth in what's being called custom build.
Yeah.
And the government is now in consultation to do exactly what you say and require local authorities to set aside land for self-build and custom-built housing. That is going on at this moment.
Maybe because there are some conditions which makes self-build less economic, because self-build is economic under a limited range of circumstances compared with volume building. If you are forced to follow the same rules which have been written for the volume house builders, then it's quite likely that self-build is going to cost more. People still do it because it's a big, very empowering thing, and it's something that a lot of people have as a dream, and they're willing to spend more money in order to build their own house, even though they have to jump through all the hoops which have been designed for the volume house builders. But also I think self-build is a special case of a general practice, which is that people, whether in groups or singly, actually going out and physically modifying, improving their environment, which is an incredibly empowering thing, because it, Churchill said, we build our houses and then, or we shape our houses and then our houses shape our lives. And that's exactly what you're saying. People's houses and lives have been shaped by this alienating, cookie cutter environment, right? What do we do about that? Well, people have to get out of their houses and they have to change their places. And there's a movement in the US called City Repair, which has been taking the anonymous intersection kind of grid model, and what people have done is they've selected an intersection and they've painted it, just painted it. That's all it takes, because that creates a focal point for the community. It makes people slow down, reduces traffic accidents, and then things start happening around the intersection. People do other little projects around that intersection, and this started in Portland, Oregon, and they originally couldn't get permission to do this, but they got permission to do a block party. So they shut the intersection, they painted it. We don't know who. And then they went to the sponsors and said, well, look, what we've actually done here has actually achieved all your policy goals. And they tick them off. And they said, well, yes, that's true. So we'll permit it. And then they permit it. And then people could go and apply to do that. So that's...
So can I ask you,
yeah.
What do you think of roundhouses as opposed to square and rectangular? Because I have this theory, I mean, tell me if I'm barking, but I have this theory that what you live in will have an impact on your psyche, on the kind of person you are. Now, where if we're living in boxes, or if we lived in a circle, would that have the potential to change the kind of human beings that we are?
Yes.
Steiner believes so.
It's a matter of function more than anything. Definitely, some people prefer that no corners idea because, like you say, there's a certain. I don't know. Maybe it is a psychological thing, but
if possibly not as much effect as the relationships you have with your neighbours. Yeah, you're living in a circle, metaphorically, with your neighbours. That might be even more powerful.
I've been told by people who live in teepees, right, that once you cross the 10-year, or I guess it's a 7-year threshold, once you spent 7 years living in a teepee, you can never go back to being the person that you were before, because something in your head has just changed.
That might be true, although there's Patrick Whitefield, who wrote a book on teepee living, that points out that since he's lived in a city, probably in a square house, he's never had a smaller eco-footprint. Because when he lived in a field in a teepee, ironically he had to drive everywhere because there was no public services in his field. And he had to go and get water, and he had to go and get firewood, and he had to do a lot of driving. But now he walks everywhere, cycling everywhere.
This guy here had his hand up earlier.
So just relating to your question now about the run, because I love the Earthships. I want to live in one. I mean, for what I've seen, they're brilliant. And I didn't hear anyone talking about the Earthships. I think that could be a great solution in terms of living.
There's a session on self-build tomorrow, which we'll probably talk about that.
Right.
But there are a lot of alternative ideas which have been developed. This, for example, geodesic domes. This is a great structure for a tent to have a session in, but it's actually not a really good structure to live in because it's very difficult to fit your life into these things. But on the other hand, maybe that could be good for some people. Maybe having the round house makes you live in a different way, makes you force you to live in a different way, like in Europe. I think that there's different things to be said for it. It's such a cultural thing. Housing is such a cultural thing. There's so many different. There's no ideal shape for house.
That's it. I find it so funny because if you asked a child or gave a child some stuff to make a new house with, they wouldn't say, is it round or is it square? Like it could be a hive, it could be a yurt. I had a terrible winter in a yurt. I didn't enjoy living in a round house. But that was for other reasons. It was about the context. It was about where again. It was about it's really freezing cold and I was arguing with people I was living with. It's there's many ways to do it. And the point about Garbage Warrior, which is the film that radicalised me and is all about Earthships, is that you need to have the flexibility in the system to experiment in the first place. So if the planning laws are preventing you from doing anything new because the house has to be connected and it has to be on the grid, then you can't make the experiments that are necessary to adapt. But they don't have to be round or square. They're weirdly shaped.
I think it would be better just to do whatever is best to make the most efficient use of the available resources. If it's round and it has a great surface cover, to get solar from the sun, then great. If we're lining up our terraced houses in the wrong direction, we're just not making good use of the available resources. And
it's been pointed out that we could radically reduce the energy consumption of new build just by elongating them east-west and making the windows on the south bigger and the windows on the north smaller. Just a very small change like that can cut the consumption of fuel tremendously. Well, round depends what you mean by round housing. I'd argue that they're actually easier to build if you're doing it by hand. It's easier to build a round straw house than a square one. I'd say that.
There may be a lot of waste material from doing a roundhouse because the materials we buy come in squares. I mean,
It's often held up as a great example, but have you ever tried ramming earth into a tyre? Have you ever tried ramming earth into 3,000 tyres? It's a lot of work.
Do you think we'll be able to? If we, how long? How long might it take to talk about a subject like this for us to come collectively to a decision on what shape our houses should be?
Circle goes on forever.
one end can be circular and one end can be square.
But if we come to something that I've noticed from travelling a lot, if we encourage creative intelligence in people rather than absolutely impose draconian conditions on everything, the one encourages creative intelligence, problem solving, solutions finding. The other one says, you're too stupid to figure anything out. You need government, police, and all kinds of regulatory systems because you're inherently dumb. Versus your inherent, like in Bali, for instance, in the cities, there are really no road rules. You can drive anywhere you want on any side of the road as long as you factor in that everyone else is doing that as well. And it encourages you to be super sharp, super attentive, and it's actually a pleasure to ride a motorbike in traffic because you're driving in a conscious ballet of human intelligence. And it's encouraged. And what you get is nothing but solutions. And in the Western system in New Zealand, if your car tires deviate over the centre line, it's an instant $400 fine. It's like, how fucking stupid is that? And of course, the people in the big SUVs are always deviating over the centre line because they've got less to lose because they're driving their own personalised tank. It's a bully mentality. I can afford to crash you off the road because I've got my own personal tank as a sort of statement about my success. Versus the other one where everyone's on a little scooter with mum, dad, the kids, the shopping, some bamboo rods, some reinforcing rods, stuff with boxes of crisps and chips that are 3 meters wide. It all works because you've established creative intelligence is the foundation. Let's entrust people to create the solutions. And it's such a great model that it's actually antithesis of the Western model.
I think slums in Mumbai, for example, are just amazing when you look at an infrastructure which has just been built by millions of people, just come together and built this massive, well, they call them slums, but it is like the ingenious way that people have managed to fit all this stuff.
There's one building code in Bali that says you're not allowed to build 5 or 10 meters of a stream or a river. That's it. Which is like, well, you're not going to get flooded in, but go for it. If it falls down, it's probably you going to be in it. If someone buys it from you, it's like buying a vehicle. Has it got an MOT or a warrant of fitness or whatever? It's up to you. What you see is what you get. Use your intelligence and move on. And all of the politicians could pretty much retire.
There's this thing that runs across every culture. If you study sort of comparative mythology in different religions, and they call it the golden rule. And it basically is just what Jesus said about if you love your don't love your neighbour as yourself. Yeah, my favourite version is St. Augustine, and he spoke about love and do as you like. But there is, and I think this is really pertinent in relation to politics. There's also, I don't know how well known it is, but the idea of the Ten Commandments in the Old Testament, and that Moses came down from Mount Sinai the first time with a set of, basically with the Golden Rule, and he tried to introduce it to the people, but they were having a party and worshipping a car, and he had to go back up the mountain for a second time to come down with the Ten Commandments, almost like to step down those, to almost like give us, okay, if you can't handle love and do as you like, here's a set of rules. Maybe you can stick to these rules. There's only 10 of them, they're a bit clearer, a bit more closely delineated. I think this is really a big political question at this point in time. Is can we trust each other? Can we accept the other? Is this like the Occupy movement, and we say, we are the 99%? Who's the 1%? We are the only logical progression from that point is to say we are the 100%, we are one, and we're already talking about it. And it's what the whole ecological movement is about. And I think this is maybe a big step forwards. Finding the space, creating the environments, the political spaces in which we can learn to trust each other and cooperate, and to allow organisation to occur spontaneously, as it does at every other fractal level, wherever we observe, nature as it unfolds. It's a difficult thing to organise. Self-organise, absolutely.
There are some Western examples of the creative chaos. Like there have been some. I can't remember. There's a town somewhere in the UK where there are always traffic jams at particular crossroads. They didn't know what to do, so they just got rid of the traffic lights. And now there's never traffic jams. I mean, it's not fancy. It doesn't always work. But there are some certain conditions whereby I think Denmark or one of the Scandinavian countries has done quite a lot of experimenting with taking the lines off the road. Because then people have to be more careful.
And all the signs, they got all the signs down, all the lines out. They've done it on a major junction where there's about 6 roads all coming to a major square in the middle of the city. And they literally took all the signage out, and actually the accident rate went down. Because everyone slowed down, they just used their nous.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
To point out, if you want an example of creative chaos, there is a building that is a perfect example of that. But no, I mean, seriously, that represents exactly what we're talking about. And I don't know, 40, 50 people for the last 5 days have demonstrated self-organisation and non-hierarchical decision making, just utilising, reclaiming resources, and doing something with a very low impact that has a very transformational kind of effect on a large group of people.
High social impact.
Massive social impact. And whilst Marcus has pointed out that this may be not the best example of efficient organisation, the things that have been created here people will take away, and I think there's a lot to be learned from events like this. So yeah, I don't know, go check it out and see what it looks like when there's no planning regulations. Interesting, but great.
It brings up another example which is also related to Bali. There's an offshore island called Gili Trawangan, and it's kind of just offshore of Lombok, but you can access it from Bali directly. I've been going there off and on for the last 25 years, and in Indonesia, which is very draconian about drug laws, there are no drug laws. They've made an arrangement with the local police that they don't come onto the island. So once you get on the boat going out to the island, weed, ecstasy, acid, it's okay. And nothing has been interfered with on the island as far as, and that's really radical for Indonesia to have no control over drugs, being really very heavy-handed. What's evolved is an incredibly flourishing economy from 5-star restaurants, I think 5 or 6 certified dive schools where you can get your patio on water, everything from sports bars to restaurants to 5-star hotels to 1-star budget hotels to everything. Everything is allowed, and everyone's encouraged to figure out their own place in it. And it's probably the most successful, thriving social, economic model in all of Indonesia. And it's what happens when you take away all the regulatory influence and encourage people to sort out their own equilibrium. And remarkably, it works brilliantly.
I noticed you used the word social economic. You didn't use the word environmental or ecological. So how does that freedom translate?
That hasn't worked as well because it's an isolated, very small pocket that's attracted disproportionately too much attention. So the environmental footprint has been, the ecological footprint has been damaged by too many people coming there because it's the only place in Indonesia where that exists. Now, if you were to spread that out more evenly, I would think the ecological environmental footprint would be really nicely managed. In this case, it isn't. Correct, but that's because it's one place in a vast country, it's the only place that attracts that kind of attention.
And it's probably still less than Richmond in London. Richmond's famously got the highest recycling rates in the country and the biggest eco.
Amazing. That got into the environmentalist.
I mean, you soon realise when you come into a situation like this, which I guess is this idea of like bioregionalism or whatever other names it goes under, is that, you know, when you put yourself in an environment that is disconnected from the cities and the towns, you know, it makes you realise kind of what is in your environment, your immediate environment, and how you can use that as a resource, and what limitations that puts on you, and so I think it is important to kind of this whole idea of bioregionalism, to kind of understand that actually when you have to use your immediate environment to survive, not just survive in the kind of strict, you know, or else, you know, survive or die, but for entertainment and for everything else, for storytelling, then you kind of become you kind of realise that you understand the importance of it, and you want to protect it, and you want to use it as responsibly as you can. And that's where that idea of separation comes in. So how can we actually encourage people to live in a way that causes them to reconnect, or remember that you can't just keep buying something because it comes from somewhere where you can't see it. You know, it's making people see the effects of their decisions. And this is, again, it's been a good example of kind of that in some ways.
I don't know what time it is, but it feels like we could wrap up. Thanks, guys, for coming and sharing with us, and thanks everybody else for contributing to that discussion.
I love the rain taste bit.
Yeah.
Before we're going to be talking about how does it feel to live in a rain rather than a square house.
Yeah.
Can you put a rain peg in a square hole?